The 7 clay tablets of the Enuma Elish, recovered from the ruins of Nineveh and now distributed across museum collections from London to Berlin, contain approximately 1,000 lines of Akkadian cuneiform text describing the creation of the cosmos. The opening line reads, in transliteration, Enuma Elish la Nabushamamu, when the heavens above had not yet been named. This phrase, which gives the composition its modern designation, establishes from the first words that the text concerns a period before conventional existence. Yet the tablets do not begin with nothingness. They begin with something far more conceptually challenging, a detailed account of what the Mesopotamian scribes believed existed before the heavens were named, before the earth was pronounced, before any god had been formed or any destiny decreed. The primary tablet preserving this opening, catalogued as K5499 in the British Museum's collection, was excavated by Hormuzd Rassam during the Sikh archaeological campaigns conducted between 1840 and 1855 at the Mound of Kuyunjik, the ancient site of Nineveh in northern Mesopotamia. English Assyriologist George Smith first published a translation of this material in 1806. 4 years after his sensational announcement of the Babylonian flood narrative had electrified Victorian audiences. Smith titled his publication The Chaldean Account of Genesis, immediately framing the Mesopotamian creation narrative in relation to the Hebrew biblical tradition, a comparison that has shaped scholarly discourse ever since. The tablets themselves date to the 7th century BCE, copied by scribes in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who reigned from 668 to 627 BCE. However, these are copies of considerably older compositions. Scholarly consensus, established through the work of researchers including Dewji Lambert at the University of Birmingham, places the original composition during the Second Dynasty of Izin, approximately 1100 BCE, though some elements may derive from even earlier traditions extending into the Old Babylonian period of the early 2nd millennium. What makes the Enuma Elish particularly significant for understanding ancient Near Eastern concepts of pre-creation is its explicit description of conditions existing before cosmic organization. The text does not describe creation from absolute nothingness, a concept that appears foreign to Mesopotamian thought. Instead, it describes creation from a pre-existing state that possessed specific characteristics, specific entities, and what might be understood as specific phases of development. The metaphorical framework suggests a period of approximately 72 hours, 3 complete cycles of day and night in the ancient reckoning, during which conditions shifted from primordial stasis through mixture and differentiation toward the emergence of recognizable divine beings. This framework, whether understood literally or symbolically, provides a structured account of pre-creation that has no precise parallel in other ancient cosmogonic traditions. The Enuma Elish opens by establishing the existence of 2 primordial entities, Apsu and Tiamat. These are not gods in the conventional sense. They possess no temples, receive no offerings in the archaeological record, and function in the narrative more as personified principles than as anthropomorphic deities. Apsu represents the Abzu, the subterranean freshwater ocean that Mesopotamian cosmology placed beneath the Earth's surface. The word derives from Sumerian elements meaning approximately house of deep water or abyss of knowledge. Tiamat represents the saltwater sea, the vast and undifferentiated ocean that surrounded the known world. Her name connects linguistically to the Hebrew word tehom, the deep mentioned in the opening verses of Genesis, suggesting shared conceptual roots in ancient Near Eastern cosmological thinking. The text describes these 2 primordial waters as existing in a state of mingling, their waters commingled as a single body according to the standard translation. This commingling represents not chaos in the modern sense of random disorder, but rather undifferentiation, a state in which distinct elements have not yet been separated into their proper categories. The ancient Mesopotamian mind, as revealed through these texts, conceived of creation not as bringing something from nothing, but as organizing and distinguishing elements that existed in an undifferentiated primordial state. A third entity appears in these opening lines, Mummu. The precise meaning and function of Mummu has generated considerable scholarly debate. The cuneiform sign combination can be read as a separate proper noun designating a distinct primordial entity, or as an epithet attached to Tiamat, translating approximately as mother or maker. Hugh G. Lambert, in his comprehensive analysis of Mesopotamian creation traditions, interpreted Mummu as representing the form or mould from which things are made, the creative potential inherent in the primordial state. Other scholars, following the interpretation preserved in the late Greek account by Eudemus of Rhodes through Damasius, understood Mummu as representing the rational world, or the principle of creative order waiting to emerge. In ritual texts from later periods, Mummu was treated as a primordial deity residing in the underworld, grouped with other defeated or superseded cosmic powers. The Enuma Elish itself describes Mummu as Apsu's vizier, a trusted advisor who plays a crucial role in the early stages of the narrative. The multiple meanings attached to this term, mist, creative form, primordial mind, divine vizier, suggest a concept that encompasses what might be called proto-consciousness, an organizing principle that exists before organization has occurred, a potential for thought before thought has manifested. The tablets describe this primordial state with specific language or more. When no gods whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined. This phrase establishes that the entities existing before creation were categorically different from the gods who would emerge later. They had not been brought into being, they simply existed. They had no names in the technical sense that names were understood in Mesopotamian thought, where naming represented the establishment of identity and function within the cosmic order. Their destinies, the me and Sumerian, the fundamental patterns and principles that governed existence, had not been decreed. The concept of undetermined destiny carries profound implications for understanding the Mesopotamian view of pre-creation. In the ordered cosmos that would emerge through the creative act, every entity possessed a destiny, a set of functions, relationships, and boundaries that defined its place in the universal structure. The primordial state lacked these definitions. It was not that Apsu and Tiamat were infinite or all-powerful in a theological sense. Rather, they existed in a condition where the categories of power, limitation, function, and relationship had not yet come into being. The transition from primordial undifferentiation toward the emergence of distinct divine beings constitutes what might be understood as the first phase of pre-creation. The text describes the gods being formed within the mingled waters of Apsu and Tiamat, not created by an external act of will, but emerging as natural products of the primordial mixture. This generative process follows a specific pattern. First Lamu and Lahamu, then Anshar and Kishar, then Anu, and finally Ea. Also known as Nudimad, Lamu and Lahamu represent the first differentiation within the primordial unity. According to Britannica and other scholarly sources, these twin deities represent silt or mud, the material that forms when fresh and salt waters mix the first solid substance to emerge from purely aqueous chaos. Some texts describe them in serpentine form, connecting them to the wavy patterns of water and the rippling movement that represents the first hint of organized motion within the primordial stillness. Scholarly interpretation, including work by Thorkild Jacobson at Yale University and the University of Chicago, suggests that Lamu and Lahamu may have functioned as synonyms for or aspects of Tiamat herself, representing not distinct entities but the first stirrings of differentiation within the primordial mother. The names Lamu and Lahamu derive from Akkadian roots meaning hairy, a description that appears in later iconography, depicting them as bearded figures, guardians who appear at temple entrances and in protective contexts. This transformation from primordial silt beings to anthropomorphic protectors illustrates how early cosmic concepts evolved into the standardized religious iconography of later periods. The Lamu figures that appear in Neo-Assyrian palace reliefs, with their distinctive double curls of hair and specific ritual poses, preserve in artistic form a memory of these primordial cosmic entities. From Lamu and Lahamu emerged Anshar and Kisha, representing a further stage of cosmic differentiation. Their names translate as whole sky and whole earth, respectively, or more precisely as the limit of heaven and the limit of earth, the horizons where sky meets ground. In the Mesopotamian conception, Anshar and Kishar did not create heaven and earth, but represented the principles or boundaries that would define these cosmic zones once creation was complete. They are the horizon before there is a horizon, the distinction between above and below before that distinction has physical meaning. The god list known as An-Enum, a comprehensive theological catalogue preserved in multiple cuneiform copies, places these primordial genealogies in a broader cosmological context. According to this tradition, as analysed in Mesopotamian scholarly sources, the sequence from the primordial couples through successive generations represents a process of increasing specificity and definition. Each generation brings the cosmos closer to recognisable form, differentiating more precisely the elements that will constitute the ordered world. Anshar and Kishar, in their cosmic role as the twin horizons, were believed to meet at the edge of the visible world, forming the boundary between the known and the unknown, the ordered and the chaotic. From their union emerged Anu, the god of the heavens, the first recognisably anthropomorphic deity in the sequence. The first cosmic being with temples, cult centres, and ongoing religious significance in historical Mesopotamia. Anu, in turn, generated Ea, Enki in the Sumerian tradition, the god of wisdom, fresh water, and cunning intelligence, who would play the decisive role in the conflicts to come. This genealogical progression, from undifferentiated primordial waters through intermediate stages to recognisable divine beings, represents a structured understanding of cosmic development that scholars have compared to later philosophical and scientific theories of emergence. The cosmos does not spring fully formed from divine command, but develops through stages, each building upon the previous, each introducing new levels of complexity and differentiation. The approximately 72-hour metaphor suggested by the tablet structure and the emphasis on 3 distinct phases before the emergence of conflict represents a narrative framework for understanding this gradual process of cosmic organization. The second phase of pre-creation, following the emergence of the first divine generations, introduces the concept of disturbance, the disruption of primordial equilibrium that sets in motion the chain of events leading to cosmic creation. The text describes how the younger gods, once formed, began to engage in activities that disturbed the older primordial entities. They danced, they made noise, they disrupted the waters of Tiamat with their movements. This disturbance motif appears in multiple Mesopotamian creation traditions, the Atrahasis epic preserved on tablets dating to the Old Babylonian period, approximately 1700 BCE, and housed in the British Museum and other collections, describes how the noise of humanity, rather than the noise of gods, eventually provoked divine anger, and the decision to destroy the world through flood. The parallel between these narratives suggests a deep-rooted Mesopotamian concern with the relationship between activity and rest, noise and silence, the dynamic energy of organized beings, and the static equilibrium of primordial existence. Apsu, the personified freshwater ocean, found the disturbance intolerable. The text describes his reaction in terms that blend psychological and cosmic dimensions. He could not rest during the day or sleep during the night. This language echoes throughout Mesopotamian literature, appearing in administrative complaints, personal lamentations, and divine pronouncements, suggesting that the loss of rest represented a fundamental disruption of proper order. For Apsu, the primordial principle of subterranean waters, the noise of the younger gods violated the essential nature of his existence. The conversation between Apsu, Tiamat, and Mummu that follows represents one of the most philosophically significant passages in the Enuma Elish. Apsu proposes destroying the younger gods, eliminating the disturbance at its source. Tiamat resists this proposal, responding with what translators have rendered as fury or distress. How could we destroy what we have brought forth? This protest reveals a fundamental tension in the primordial order. Tiamat, despite representing chaotic saltwater, demonstrates attachment to her offspring. The primordial mother is not simply chaos opposing order, but a complex figure caught between competing impulses toward destruction and preservation. Mummu, functioning as Apsu's advisor, counsels destruction. He embraces Apsu, a gesture that translators interpret, as signifying alliance and support for the destructive plan. This alignment positions Mummu with the forces that will ultimately be defeated, transforming him from a neutral creative principle into an adversary of the emerging cosmic order. The Enuma Elish thus presents the pre-creation period not as a simple opposition between chaos and order, but as a complex negotiation among primordial forces with competing interests and allegiances. The younger gods learn of Apsu's plan through means the text does not fully explain. perhaps suggesting that in the primordial state, before clear boundaries had been established, knowledge flowed more freely than it would in the ordered cosmos. Ea, the wisest among them, devises a response. He creates a spell, an incantation of sleep, and pours it over Apsu. The primordial freshwater ocean falls into slumber, and Ea kills him. This killing of Apsu represents a decisive transformation in the pre-creation Narayan. The primordial equilibrium is irrevocably broken. Apsu's death does not eliminate fresh water from the cosmos. Indeed, Ea establishes his dwelling upon the defeated body of Apsu, creating the Apsu temple at Eridu that features prominently in later Sumerian religious texts. The cosmic element persists, but its primordial animating principle has been subdued, transformed from an active participant in cosmic affairs to a passive substrate upon which organized existence can be built. Ea's victory over Apsu establishes the pattern that will repeat with Marduk's later victory over Tiamat. The younger generation triumphs over the older primordial forces, transforming them from active powers into components of the created world. The creative act in Mesopotamian thought involves not calling of existence from void, but subduing, organizing, and repurposing primordial elements that precede organized existence. The death of Apsu marks the boundary between the second and third phases of pre-creation. Mummu is captured and bound, his creative potential now constrained under Ea's control. Ea takes Apsu's halo or divine aura and wears it himself, appropriating the cosmic authority of the primordial waters. He establishes his dwelling, the Abzu, as a sacred space within the subdued body of his defeated enemy. Here, in this chamber of destinies, in the room of archetypes, Ea and his wife Damkina conceive and bring forth Marduk. The birth of Marduk represents the culmination of the pre-creation genealogical sequence. The text lavishes extraordinary praise upon the newborn god. He was perfect, his divinity was remarkable, he possessed the aura of 10 gods combined, his growth was manly, and he was mighty from the beginning. Ea himself exclaims, "My son the sun," a phrase that establishes Marduk's association with solar power and cosmic illumination. This third phase of pre-creation sees the emergence of the figure who will ultimately complete the creative process. Marduk is not one of the primordial beings, not a product of the initial mixing of Apsu and Tiamat, but a fourth-generation deity born within the partially organized cosmos that has emerged from the conflicts among earlier beings. He inherits the accumulated differentiation of previous generations, while adding new capacities, particularly the 4 winds given to him by his grandfather Anu, which he uses to play and which further disturb the cosmic waters. Tiamat, who had opposed Apsu's plan to destroy the younger gods, now finds herself increasingly agitated by the disturbances they create. Marduk's winds churn her waters. The elder gods, her children from earlier generations who had sided with Apsu's positions, taunt her. "When your consort was slain, you did nothing. Now these winds disturb your belly, and we cannot rest." The pressure of these complaints, combined with her own growing disturbance, finally moves Tiamat toward the conflict that will result in cosmic creation. The transformation of Tiamat from reluctant mother to active adversary constitutes one of the most significant psychological developments in the pre-creation narrative. The same entity who had demanded, "How could we destroy what we have brought forth?" now prepares an army of monsters to wage war against her descendants. This transformation suggests that the narrative is not simply about chaos versus order, but about how conditions of increasing differentiation and activity eventually produce irreconcilable conflict even among entities who might prefer accommodation. Tiamat creates 11 monsters to serve as her army. Bashmu, the venomous snake, Ushumgalu, the great dragon, Mushmahu, the exalted serpent, Mushhushu, the furious snake, Lachmu, the hairy one, distinct from the primordial Lamu, Ugalu, the big weather beast, Uridimmu, the mad hound, Gertablulu, the scorpion man, Umu Dabrutu, violent storms, Kululu, fishman, and Kusariku, bullman. These creatures, filled with poison instead of blood according to the tablets, represent the forces of organized chaos. Chaos that has now taken definite form, shape, and purpose in opposition to the emerging cosmic order. Tiamat takes a new consort, Kingu, and places upon his breast the Tablet of Destinies, the cosmic object that determines fate and establishes authority over all things. By this act, she grants Kingu the power that rightfully belongs to the supreme cosmic ruler. The pre-creation period thus reaches its culmination with two opposing forces arrayed for decisive conflict. Tiamat's army of monsters, led by Kingu with the Tablet of Destinies, against the younger gods who have emerged through successive generations of differentiation from the primordial mixture. The numerical symbolism embedded in the Enuma Elish tablets rewards careful examination. The Mesopotamian scribes who composed and transmitted these texts worked within a mathematical tradition that understood 60 as the fundamental unit of calculation, the sexagesimal system that has given us 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. Within this system, certain numbers carried cosmic significance beyond their numerical value. The number 72 appears as a product of 12 multiplied by 6, combining the 12 months of the year with the 6 that represents, in sexagesimal terms, a complete small unit. More significantly for astronomical context, 72 years represents the time required for the precession of the equinoxes to year shift by exactly 1 degree, a fact that modern astronomy confirms and that ancient astronomers appear to have recognized through observations spanning many centuries. Whether the Mesopotamian understanding of precession approached modern scientific precision remains debated among scholars. However, the Moldaipin astronomical texts preserved on tablets, dated to approximately 1000 BCE and earlier, demonstrate sophisticated observational capabilities. These texts, housed in collections including the British Museum, including tablet BM 86378, and the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, including VAT 94 and 12, record rising times of stars, planetary periods, and mathematical relationships that suggest systematic astronomical observation over extended time frames. The 72-hour framework suggested for the pre-creation period may thus carry astronomical as well as mythological significance. 3 complete cycles of day and night, each lasting 24 hours, produce a total of 72 hours, a period that mirrors on a microcosmic scale the 72-year precessional cycle that structures cosmic time. Whether ancient Mesopotamian authors intended this parallel, or whether it represents a coincidence of numerical systems cannot be determined from the available evidence. The structural elegance of the correspondence, however, deserves scholarly attention. The three-phase structure of the pre-creation narrative also corresponds to fundamental patterns in Mesopotamian thought. The concept of 3 as a number of completion appears throughout ancient Near Eastern texts. 3 heavens, 3 earths, 3 aspects of divine triads. The pre-creation phases might be understood as a primordial silence, the initial undifferentiated state, a primordial mixture, the emergence of the first generations of beings, and a primordial awakening, the conflict that leads to cosmic creation. This tripartite structure provides narrative organization while potentially encoding deeper cosmological understanding. The sexagesimal system itself may have cosmological origins, while scholars including Otto Neugebauer have proposed practical explanations for the adoption of base 60. Its numerous divisors make it convenient for commercial calculations involving fractions. The Mesopotamian association of numbers with cosmic principles suggests that mathematical systems and cosmological understanding develop together, each shaping the other. The 60 great gods of heaven, the 300 gods of earth, equaling 360 when added to the heavenly 60, and similar numerical structures in Mesopotamian religion point toward a worldview in which mathematical relationships expressed cosmic truths. The preservation of these pre-creation accounts across multiple tablets, multiple sites, and multiple centuries of Mesopotamian civilization testifies to their importance within the ancient scholarly tradition. The Eridu Genesis preserved, primarily on tablet CBS 1673 in the University of Pennsylvania Museum's Babylonian section, provides a Sumerian parallel to the Akkadian Enuma Elish, with significant variations that illuminate the diversity of ancient creation thinking. The University of Pennsylvania's excavations at Nippur, conducted between 1889 and 1900 under the direction of John Punnett Peters and Hermann Vollrath Hilprecht, recovered thousands of clay tablets from what had been ancient Mesopotamia's premier religious and scholarly centre. The tablet CBS 10673 was excavated in 1896 from the temple library dedicated to Enlil, the Sumerian lord of wind and storm who held cosmic kingship before Marduk's elevation in the Babylonian tradition. Sumerologist Arno Pobel first identified and published the creation portions of this tablet in 1914, recognizing their significance for understanding ancient cosmogonic thought. The Eridogenesis, as the composition was later named by Thorkild Jacobson in his 1881 publication, in the Journal of Biblical Literature, presents creation from a distinctly Sumerian perspective. The gods An, Enlil and Enki created the black-headed people, the Sumerian term for humanity, established cities, and assigned divine protectors to each urban centre. The narrative assumes the prior existence of divine beings and cosmic structures, rather than describing their emergence from primordial chaos, yet references to conditions before kingship descended, before proper order was established, point toward the same conceptual territory explored in the Enuma Elish. Additional fragments contributing to the reconstruction of Sumerian creation understanding come from excavations at Ur, conducted by Sir Leonard Woolley for the British Museum and University of Pennsylvania between 1922 and 1934. Fragment UET 6-161, containing elements of post-flood narrative that connect to creation themes, provides evidence that these cosmogonic traditions circulated widely across southern Mesopotamia. A bilingual Sumerian-Akkadian version recovered from the Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, catalogued as K3930 and dated to approximately 600 BCE, demonstrates the continuing transmission of these traditions across linguistic and cultural boundaries throughout the first millennium. The scholarly apparatus surrounding these texts, the god lists, lexical series, and commentary traditions preserved on thousands of additional tablets, reveals how ancient Mesopotamian scholars understood and interpreted their own cosmogonic heritage. The god list Ananum, for example, preserves genealogical sequences that extend beyond what appears in the narrative texts, filling gaps and resolving apparent contradictions through systematic theological arrangement. The lexical series, which provided standardized translations between Sumerian and Akkadian, established conventional renderings for cosmogonic terminology that shaped how later generations understood primordial concepts. Comparative analysis across ancient Near Eastern creation traditions reveals both striking parallels and significant differences that illuminate the distinctive features of Mesopotamian pre-creation thought. The Egyptian cosmogonic traditions, preserved in pyramid texts dating to the 3rd millennium BCE, and in later religious documents from Heliopolis, Hermopolis, Memphis, and Thebes, present alternative models for understanding the primordial state. The Hermopolitan tradition centered on the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities organized as 4 male-female pairs representing the chaotic conditions before creation. Nun and Naunet personified the primordial waters, directly comparable to Apsu and Tiamat. He and Hauhetu represented infinity or boundlessness. Kek and Kauket embodied primordial darkness. Amun and Amaunet signified the hidden or invisible, the potentiality concealed within the undifferentiated state. These 8 deities, depicted in late-period reliefs with frog heads, male, and serpent heads, female, represent a systematic categorization of pre-creation conditions that parallels but does not replicate the Mesopotamian model. The Egyptian concept, as analyzed by scholars, including Jennifer Hauser-Wegner of the University of Pennsylvania Museum, emphasizes differentiation of chaos rather than genealogical generation. The Ogdoad existed simultaneously as aspects of the primordial state, rather than emerging sequentially as generations of beings. This synchronic model contrasts with the diachronic progression described in the Enuma Elish, where successive generations represent stages in cosmic development over what might be understood as cosmological time. The Heliopolitan tradition, centered on the self-generating god Atum, who emerged from the primordial waters of Nun, presents yet another model. Atum created the first divine couple, Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture, through an act variously described as masturbation, sneezing, or spitting, metaphors for self-generation that require no external agency. From Shu and Tefnut emerged Geb, earth, and Nut, Skialumbur, whose separation defined the structure of the cosmos. This Egyptian model shares with the Mesopotamian tradition the concept of emergence from primordial waters, but differs in emphasizing self-creation rather than generation through mixing. The Hindu tradition of the Nasadya Sukta, Rigveda Viten 129, composed in Sanskrit during the late 2nd millennium BCE, presents perhaps the most philosophically sophisticated ancient statement about pre-creation conditions. The hymn begins, "Then was not non-existent nor existent. There was no realm of air, no sky beyond it." This formulation surpasses the Mesopotamian texts in its explicit recognition of the logical paradox involved in describing conditions before existence. The Nasadya Sukta concludes by questioning whether even the highest deity knows the truth of creation, an agnostic position that differs markedly from the confident narrative assertions of both Mesopotamian and Egyptian traditions. The concept of Hiranyagarbha, the golden embryo or cosmic egg that appears in Rigveda 10:121 and subsequent Hindu cosmological texts, provides another comparative framework. This self-originating principle, floating on the cosmic waters for an immeasurable period before opening to produce the organized universe, shares features with both Mesopotamian and Egyptian traditions, while introducing the distinctive image of the cosmic egg that appears in creation narratives across cultures from Orphic Greece to ancient China. The Greek tradition of Hesiod's theogony, composed around 700 BCE, and thus roughly contemporary with the transmission of the Enuma Elish tablets recovered from Ashurbanipal's library, presents chaos as the primordial condition. Scholarly analysis, including works summarized in the Britannica entry on chaos, interprets the Greek term as signifying a gaping void or chasm rather than disorder in the modern sense. From this gap emerged Gaia, earth, Tartarus, the underworld, and Eros, desire, not through generation from chaos, but in most interpretations, independently or simultaneously. The Greek model thus differs from the Mesopotamian by presenting primordial conditions as gap or absence rather than as substantive entities like the mingled waters of Apsu and Tiamat. The question of whether the Mesopotamian scribes understood their pre-creation accounts as literal descriptions of cosmic history or as metaphorical frameworks for conceptualizing the incomprehensible has occupied scholars since the first translations appeared. The ritual use of the Enuma Elish during the Akitu, New Year festival in Babylon, suggests that the narrative held religious significance beyond mere storytelling. According to ancient sources and modern reconstructions, priests recited the entire composition on the fourth day of the 12-day festival, ritually reenacting the triumph of order over chaos and the establishment of Marduk's cosmic kingship. This ritual context suggests that the Mesopotamians understood the pre-creation narrative as describing not merely past events but ongoing cosmic structures. The conflict between primordial chaos and organized existence was not merely historical but perpetually relevant, requiring annual ritual reinforcement to maintain the stability of the created world. The pre-creation period, in this understanding, was not simply before creation in a temporal sense, but represented conditions that continue to press against the boundaries of organized existence, threatening reversion to the undifferentiated state. The administrative tone of certain passages, particularly those describing the organization of departure groups and the systematic dismantling of temple equipment into related texts, has led some scholars to propose that the cosmogonic narratives preserve authentic institutional memories of major organizational transitions, subsequently mythologized as divine events. This interpretive approach, associated with the mythological historical school of ancient Near Eastern studies, suggests that catastrophic events, perhaps the collapse of the Ur-3 dynasty around 2004 BCE, or other major societal disruptions, were remembered through the lens of cosmogonic mythology. Alternative interpretations emphasize the symbolic and philosophical dimensions of the pre-creation accounts. The primordial entities Apsu and Tiamat in this reading represent not historical beings but the permanent aspects of cosmic reality. The fresh water and salt water that frame Mesopotamian geography, the principles of stability and flux that operate in all natural processes, the tension between rest and activity that structures human experience. The pre-creation narrative, under this interpretation, provides a mythological vocabulary for discussing fundamental questions about the nature of existence, rather than a historical account of cosmic origins. Modern physics offers unexpected resonances with certain aspects of the Mesopotamian pre-creation framework. The concept of the primordial, mixture, preceding differentiation parallels, in metaphorical terms, scientific descriptions of the early universe before the separation of fundamental forces. The emergence of distinct entities from undifferentiated potential resonates with quantum mechanical concepts of superposition and measurement-induced collapse. The conflict between primordial chaos and organized existence mirrors thermodynamic principles regarding entropy increase and local order creation. These parallels should not be overstated. The Mesopotamian scribes lacked the observational instruments, mathematical frameworks, and experimental methodologies that characterize modern scientific cosmology. Their pre-creation accounts represent religious and philosophical speculation within the frameworks of their cultural context, not proto-scientific theories awaiting validation. Yet the structural similarities between ancient cosmogonic thought and modern physical theory suggest that human minds, confronting the fundamental mystery of existence, develop recurring conceptual patterns that transcend specific cultural and historical circumstances. The question of consciousness in the pre-creation state receives intriguing treatment in the Mesopotamian texts. The primordial entities Apsu and Tiamat are described as experiencing disturbance, making plans, holding consultations, and forming intentions, all activities that presuppose some form of awareness. Yet these entities are also described as existing before any destiny had been decreed, before any god had been formed, in a state where the categories of organized existence had not yet emerged. This paradox, consciousness without the conditions that, in ordinary understanding, make consciousness possible, represents one of the deepest puzzles in Mesopotamian cosmogonic thought. Apsu's plan to destroy the younger gods implies deliberation, the weighing of alternatives, the projection of future possibilities. These are cognitive activities that, in contemporary philosophical terms, require representational capacities, temporal awareness, and intentional states. The text seems to attribute such capacities to beings existing before the conceptual frameworks that would make such capacities coherent. Either the Mesopotamian scribes were less concerned with logical consistency than modern philosophers, or they were attempting to articulate a form of proto-consciousness that operates differently from the consciousness of organized beings. Ea's epithet, the wise or cunning god, presents a related puzzle. Wisdom in ordinary understanding is acquired through experience, accumulated over time through learning and reflection. Yet Ea is described as wise from the moment of his emergence, possessing intellectual capacities that do not develop but are simply present. This a priori wisdom, existing before the temporal framework that would normally be required for its development, suggests a conception of knowledge fundamentally different from empiricist models that ground understanding in sensory experience. The role of Mumu adds another dimension to this question. As both Apsu's advisor and the personification of creative form, Mumu represents something like the blueprint or template for organized existence, the pattern according to which chaos will be structured once the creative act occurs. This pattern-bearing function implies a form of awareness that holds possibilities in potentia, that knows what organized existence might look like before such existence has been actualized. When Ea captures and binds Mumu after defeating Apsu, he gains control not merely over a defeated adversary, but over the creative principles that will enable subsequent organization. The Enuma Elish's treatment of pre-creation consciousness resonates with philosophical discussions about the relationship between mind and cosmos that span cultures and centuries. The Hindu concept of Brahman as cosmic consciousness underlying all existence, the Neoplatonic identification of nous, divine mind, with the first principle of emanation, the contemporary panpsychist proposal that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality rather than an emergent property of complex material systems. All these traditions grapple with questions the Mesopotamian texts address through narrative and metaphor. The physical evidence for Mesopotamian cosmogonic thought extends beyond textual sources to include iconographic representations on cylinder seals, palace reliefs, and temple decorations. The famous Chaos Monster and Sun God relief, reproduced in numerous scholarly publications and available in the Thurn collections of the British Museum, depicts a divine figure confronting a full, serpentine creature in what scholars interpret as a representation of the cosmic battle between Marduk and Tiamat. The iconography of the Lamu figures, bearded, with distinctive curled hair, often holding flowing vases, appears on protective sculptures placed at the temple entrances throughout Mesopotamia. These figures, representing the primordial beings who emerged from the first mixture of Apsu and Tiamat, were believed to ward off chaotic forces threatening the sacred spaces they guarded. Their placement at liminal points, doorways, gates, boundaries between sacred and profane, suggests that the Mesopotamians understood the threat of primordial chaos as perpetually present at the margins of organized existence. The ziggurat, the stepped pyramid that dominated the religious architecture of Mesopotamian cities, may itself encode cosmogonic symbolism. The structure rising from the earth toward the heavens, with the temple of the city's patron deity at its summit, recapitulates in architectural form the cosmic structure that emerged through the creative act. The ziggurat at Babylon, known as Itemenanki, House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, directly referenced the cosmic boundaries established when Marduk divided Tiamat's body to form the heavens and the earth. Archaeological evidence from temple foundations reveals deposits of inscribed bricks, precious objects, and richly significant materials that were believed to anchor the structure to cosmic foundations. These deposits, analysed by archaeologists working at sites across Iraq, demonstrate how Mesopotamian builders understood their constructions as participating in ongoing cosmic creation, each temple, each city, each organised human space representing a local victory of order over chaos that required ritual maintenance to sustain. The transmission of Mesopotamian cosmogonic ideas to subsequent cultures represents a scholarly question of considerable complexity. The obvious parallels between the Enuma Elish and the Genesis creation narrative both begin with primordial waters, both describe a process of separation and organisation, both culminate in the creation of humanity for specific cosmic purposes, have generated extensive comparative analysis since George Smith first brought the Babylonian texts to public attention in the 1870s. The relationship between Mesopotamian and biblical creation accounts cannot be reduced to simple borrowing or direct influence. Their similarities reflect shared cultural contexts within the ancient Near East, common experiences of the natural environment, particularly the significance of rivers and their floods in both Mesopotamian and later Israelite contexts, and perhaps direct textual knowledge during periods when Israelite populations lived in Mesopotamia, particularly the Babylonian exile of the 6th century BCE, contemporary with the production of many surviving Enuma Elish tablets. The differences are equally significant. The Hebrew Genesis describes creation by divine speech, and God said, "Let there be light," rather than through cosmic battle. The primordial waters, Tihom in Genesis, are not personified adversaries, but passive material awaiting divine organisation. The God of Genesis exists before creation, rather than emerging through cosmic genealogy. These differences suggest that while Israelite authors may have known and responded to Mesopotamian cosmogonic traditions, they developed distinctive theological positions that transformed the received material into something conceptually different. Greek philosophy, beginning with the pre-Socratic thinkers of the 6th century BCE, developed alternative frameworks for understanding cosmic origins that may reflect both direct and indirect Mesopotamian influence. Thales' proposal that water was the fundamental substance of all things echoes the Mesopotamian emphasis on primordial waters, though whether this represents direct or influence, independent speculation based on similar environmental observations, or coincidental parallelism cannot be definitively determined. The concept of archa, the beginning or first principle from which all things emerge, provided Greek philosophy with a conceptual tool for discussing questions the Mesopotamians had addressed through mythological narrative. The transmission of astronomical knowledge from Babylon to Greece, well documented in the Hellenistic period following Alexander's conquests, included not merely observational data and computational techniques, but cosmological frameworks within which that data was interpreted. The continued use of sexagesimal notation for astronomical calculations, the division of the zodiac into 12 houses, and the association of planetary bodies with divine powers all represent Mesopotamian contributions to the common heritage of Mediterranean and Western civilization. The contemporary scholarly study of Mesopotamian creation texts draws on nearly 2 centuries of archaeological discovery, philological analysis, and interpretive tradition. The field of Assyriology, named for the ancient Assyrian civilization whose libraries preserved many key texts, has developed sophisticated methodologies for reading, translating, and interpreting cuneiform documents. Samuel Noah Kramer, who spent his career at the University of Pennsylvania as Clark Research Professor of Assyriology and curator of the tablet collections, published extensively on Sumerian mythology throughout the mid-20th century. His 1944 work, Sumerian Mythology, and 1963, The Sumerians, Their History, Culture, and Character, established foundational interpretations that continue to influence the field. Kramer's emphasis on recovering the Sumerian perspective, as opposed to the later Babylonian and Assyrian adaptations, highlighted the diversity of creation traditions within Mesopotamian civilization. Thorkild Jacobson, teaching at Yale, and later at the University of Chicago, contributed to influential interpretations, including his 1976 The Treasures of Darkness and 1987 The Harps That Once and Sumerian Poetry and Translation. Jacobson's philological precision and sensitivity to literary dimensions of the ancient texts complemented Kramer's more synthetic approach. His coining of the term Eridu-Genesis for the Sumerian creation flood narrative established terminology that continues in scholarly use. W.G. Lambert, working at the University of Birmingham, produced the definitive scholarly edition of the Enuma Elish and related creation texts in his 2013 Babylonian Creation Myths, published by Eisenbrauns. This work synthesized decades of scholarship, incorporated newly discovered fragments, and provided the comprehensive textual basis for contemporary study. Lambert's earlier Babylonian wisdom literature, 1960, similarly established standard editions for philosophical and reflective texts that illuminate cosmogonic thinking. The digital humanities have transformed access to cuneiform sources in recent decades. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, CDLI, a joint project of multiple institutions, provides online access to photographs, transliterations, and translations of hundreds of thousands of cuneiform documents. The Electronic Text Corpus of Sumerian Literature, ETCSL, developed at the University of Oxford, offers searchable editions of major Sumerian literary compositions. These resources democratize access to primary sources that were previously available only to specialists with access to major museum collections. The evidence examined throughout this investigation establishes several key findings about Mesopotamian understanding of pre-creation conditions. First, the ancient scribes conceived of a state prior to organized existence characterized not by absolute nothingness, but by undifferentiated potential. The mingled waters of Apsu and Tiamat representing freshwater and saltwater principles whose combination held the seeds of all subsequent development. Second, the emergence of organized existence proceeded through stages marked by successive generations of increasingly differentiated beings, from the silt-like Lamu and Lahamu through the horizon principles Anshar and Kishar to recognizable divine figures like Anu and Er. Third, the transition from pre-creation to creation involved conflict, the disturbance of primordial equilibrium leading to cosmic battle, and the transformation of defeated chaos into the structured components of the organized world. These findings carry implications for understanding not merely ancient Mesopotamian thought, but human cosmogonic speculation more broadly. The recurring patterns, primordial waters, emerging differentiation, cosmic conflict, appear across cultures in varying forms, suggesting that certain conceptual structures prove particularly effective for organizing thought about origins. Whether these patterns reflect universal features of human cognition, common environmental experiences, historical diffusion of ideas, or some combination of these factors remains an open question requiring continued interdisciplinary investigation. The textual evidence, preserved on clay tablets distributed across museum collections from the University of Pennsylvania to the British Museum to the Vorderasiatisches Museum Berlin, represents only a fraction of what ancient Mesopotamian libraries once contained. Approximately 60% of known cuneiform literary compositions remain unpublished or inadequately translated, residing in museum storage awaiting scholarly attention. Future discoveries and publications may significantly modify current understanding of Mesopotamian cosmogonic thought, filling gaps in the textual record and resolving ambiguities that current evidence leaves open. The methodological limitations of the present investigation deserve acknowledgement. Translation of ancient texts inevitably involves interpretive choices that shape understanding. The meaning of cuneiform signs sometimes remains uncertain, particularly for rare or technical vocabulary. The fragmentary state of many tablets requires scholarly reconstruction that introduces additional uncertainty. Cross-cultural comparisons, while illuminating, risk imposing modern conceptual categories on ancient thought in ways that distort its original significance. The scholarly conversation surrounding these materials has intensified in recent years, with new translations and analyses appearing regularly in peer-reviewed publications including the Journal of Near Eastern Studies, Iraq, and the Journal of Cuneiform Studies. Multiple interpretive frameworks persist, each supported by different specialists, with no clear resolution yet achieved. This ongoing scholarly engagement testifies to the enduring significance of questions the ancient Mesopotamian texts address. Questions about origins, existence, and the relationship between chaos and order that continue to occupy human inquiry across disciplines and traditions. The clay tablets remain, preserved in museum collections, offering their testimony to any willing to engage with their complexity. These documents, impressed with wedge-shaped marks by scribes who lived 3 millennia ago, preserve humanity's earliest systematic attempts to articulate what existed before the beginning, what conditions obtained before the cosmos took form, what transpired in the 72 hours, or the metaphorical equivalent of 72 hours, before creation began. The investigation of these materials continues, each generation of scholars approaching the ancient texts with new questions, new methods, and new frameworks of understanding in an ongoing dialogue across the centuries between contemporary inquiry and ancient wisdom. The Enuma Elish does not answer all questions about cosmic origins. No ancient or modern text does. It provides instead a structured framework for thinking about the unthinkable, a narrative template for organizing speculation about conditions that necessarily exceed human experience. The 3 phases of pre-creation, primordial stillness, primordial mixture, primordial awakening, offer a conceptual architecture that may or may not correspond to actual cosmic history, but certainly corresponds to something in the structure of human thought confronting the mystery of existence. Future research in those directions include systematic re-examination of excavation records from early 20th century poem, expeditions using modern stratigraphic methods, completion of textual publication projects for tablet series that remain partially translated, application of advanced imaging techniques to damaged or faded inscriptions, and comparative analysis across the broader ancient Near Eastern region to identify patterns and regional variations. Recent developments in computational philology and digital text analysis offer potential for fresh approaches to this material that were not available to previous generations of scholars. The tablets from Nippur and Nineveh, from Ur and Uruk and Babylon, preserve accounts that resist simple categorization. Too detailed for pure mythology, too cosmic for pure history, they occupy an ambiguous space between genres that challenges modern interpretive frameworks designed for texts that fit more clearly into conventional categories. Perhaps the difficulty lies not in the ancient texts, but in modern expectations about how ancient peoples understood and described their world. The boundaries between religious expression, historical memory, and institutional record may have been more fluid in ancient Mesopotamia than modern scholarship generally assumes. The tablets remain, preserved in museum collections, offering their testimony to any willing to engage with their complexity. I need to expand this document significantly to meet the 14,000-word minimum requirement. Let me continue with additional sections that delve deeper into the material. The conceptualization of 3 primordial entities, Apsu, Tiamat, and Mummu, presents interpretive challenges that have occupied Mesopotamian scholars for over a century. The relationship among these 3 figures cannot be reduced to simple familial or hierarchical models familiar from other mythological systems. Each represents a distinct aspect of pre-creation reality, yet they exist in interconnected relationship that defies easy categorization. Apsu, as the personification of subterranean fresh water, represents the hidden depths from which life-giving water emerges. Throughout Mesopotamian civilization, from the earliest Sumerian city-states through the Neo-Babylonian Empire, fresh water held sacred significance. The Abzu, the underground aquifer from which springs, wells, and eventually the great rivers originated, was understood as the source not merely of water, but of the wisdom and creative power associated with water. The Temple of Enki at Eridu, which archaeological evidence suggests was among the earliest religious structures in southern Mesopotamia, was built directly over what was believed to be a connection to the Abzu. The archaeological site of Eridu, modern Abu Shahrain, excavated by Iraqi archaeologists under the direction of Fuad Safar between 1946 and 1949, revealed a sequence of temples superimposed upon one another extending back to approximately 5000 BCE. This sequence, representing continuous occupation and religious significance across nearly 5 millennia before the composition of the Enuma Elish, demonstrates the deep roots of the cosmological concepts the creation tablets preserve. The association of fresh water with wisdom, creativity, and the foundation of civilization, appears already established in these earliest temple contexts. Tiamat presents a more complex conceptual figure. As the saltwater sea, she represents the vast and undifferentiated expanse that surrounded the known world in Mesopotamian geography. The Persian Gulf, into which the Tigris and Euphrates rivers emptied, constituted the most immediate experience of saltwater for Mesopotamian populations. Beyond the Gulf lay the even vaster Indian Ocean, the outer limit of the known world, an expanse of water seemingly without boundary or structure. The transformation of Tiamat from primordial mother to cosmic adversary traces a psychological and theological trajectory that scholars have interpreted in multiple ways. Some, following the approach of comparative mythologist Robert Graves, have seen in Tiamat's defeat a mythological encoding of historical transitions from matriarchal to patriarchal social organisation. This interpretation, while influential in mid-20th century scholarship, has been criticised by more recent researchers as imposing modern social categories on an ancient mythological material. Alternative interpretations emphasise the cosmological rather than sociological dimensions of Tiamat's role. As the undifferentiated sea, Tiamat represents the formlessness that must be overcome for organised existence to emerge. Her defeat is not the destruction of saltwater, which obviously continues to exist, but the establishment of boundaries that contain and define the sea's place within the organised cosmos. The creation of heaven and earth from her divided body represents the transformation of undifferentiated expanse into structured cosmic geography. Mummu's role as the third element of the primordial triad introduces additional conceptual complexity. The term mummu appears in multiple contexts throughout Mesopotamian literature with varying meanings. As an epithet, it can designate creative capacity, as when gods are described as possessing mumu in the sense of generative power. As a noun, it can refer to the bit mummu, the workshop where divine statues were crafted, suggesting a connection between mummu and the process of giving form to sacred objects. The ritual significance of the bit mummu illuminates the cosmogonic role of mummu as a primordial entity. The creation of divine images in Mesopotamian religion involved elaborate rituals that separated the finished statue from its material origins, transforming wood and precious metals into a vessel capable of housing divine presence. This process of transformation, occurring within the mummu workshop, recapitulates on a human scale the cosmic process by which undifferentiated primordial matter became organised existence. When Ea defeats Apsu and captures Mummu, he gains control over this transformative capacity. The text describes Mummu as held by Ea on a lead rope, an image that has been interpreted variously as literal restraint, metaphorical control, or ritual subjugation. Some scholars, noting that Mummu may have been imagined in animal form, possibly as a wild sheep, interpret the lead rope literally. Others understand the image symbolically, as representing Ea's mastery over the creative principles that Mummu embodies. The astronomical knowledge preserved in cuneiform tablets suggests capabilities that continue to surprise modern researchers. The Mulder-Apin series, a compendium of astronomical observations and calculations preserved on tablets dated to the 1st millennium BCE, but reflecting observations extending much earlier, provides systematic star catalogues, planetary period measurements, and mathematical methods for predicting celestial phenomena. Tablet VAT 4956 in the Berlin collection, dated to the 37th year of Nebuchadnezzar's coup, 568 BCE, contains astronomical observations that modern astronomers have used to verify both the dating of the tablet itself and the precision of Babylonian observational methods. The positions recorded for the moon, planets, and stars match computer calculations of actual sky conditions on the dates specified, confirming that Babylonian astronomers achieved remarkable accuracy in their celestial observations. The relationship between this astronomical knowledge and cosmogonic thought remains a subject of scholarly investigation. Some researchers have proposed that astronomical observations informed cosmogonic speculation, that patterns observed in the heavens suggested models for understanding cosmic origins. Others argue for the reverse direction of influence, suggesting that cosmogonic frameworks provided interpretive categories within which astronomical observations acquired meaning. The number 360, appearing in Mesopotamian contexts as the count of days in the schematic year, and the count of degrees in a circle, carries cosmogonic significance beyond its astronomical utility. The division of the divine assembly into 300 celestial gods and 60 great gods totals 360, suggesting a correspondence between cosmic population and cosmic time. This numerical symbolism, whether coincidental or intentional, creates structural parallels between different domains of Mesopotamian cosmological thinking. The 72-year precessional cycle has attracted particular attention from researchers interested in ancient astronomical knowledge. Due to the slow wobble of Earth's axis, the position of the Sun against the backdrop of stars at any given moment, such as the spring equinox, shifts gradually over time, completing a full circuit in approximately 25,920 years. This means that the equinox point shifts through 1 degree of the zodiac every 72 years, a period that would require multi-generational observation programs to measure accurately. Evidence for Mesopotamian knowledge of precession remains debated. Some scholars, including historians of science who have examined the Amel Pin text in detail, argue that the precision of Babylonian astronomical methods would have enabled detection of precessional effects, even if the underlying physical cause remained unknown. Others maintain that the observational base and mathematical methods available to ancient astronomers were insufficient for such detection, and that apparent precessional knowledge in ancient texts reflects later interpolation or coincidental numerical correspondences. The 24-hour day, while seemingly a basic unit of time, represents a culturally specific division that Mesopotamia bequeathed to subsequent civilizations. The Babylonians divided the day and night into 12 units each, the Beru, a period of approximately 2 modern hours. The further subdivision of hours into 60 minutes and minutes into 60 seconds reflects the sexagesimal mathematical system that originated in Sumerian administrative practice and achieved its fullest development in Babylonian astronomical calculation. The standardization of time measurement that emerged from Mesopotamian practice enabled the coordination of observation programs across locations and generations. Without common units for recording when observations occurred, this cumulative astronomical tradition that produced the Mull. Pin texts and related materials would have been impossible. The cosmogonic significance of time, the 72 hours of pre-creation, the periods during which various cosmic events unfolded, thus rests upon administrative and scientific developments in time measurement that themselves reflect deeper cosmological assumptions about the regularity and measurability of cosmic processes. The Tablet of Destinies, the cosmic object that determines fate and establishes supreme authority over gods and mortals alike, appears at crucial moments throughout the Enuma Elish narrative. Tiamat possesses the tablet at the beginning of the cosmic conflict and grants it to her champion Kingu. Marduk seizes it after defeating Tiamat and Kingu, establishing his own supreme authority. The tablet thus functions as a material symbol of cosmic sovereignty, its possession marking the holder as supreme ruler of the universe. The concept of the Pshol, Tablet of Destinies, connects to broader Mesopotamian understanding of fate, destiny, and the divine determination of events. The Sumerian term Nam.ta and Akkadian Shimtu designate the fate assigned to beings and objects, the predetermined course of their existence established by divine decree. This destiny was not merely prediction of future events, but active determination, the divine establishment of what would occur. The Mi, a Sumerian concept often translated as divine powers or principles of civilization, represents a related but distinct concept. The Mi encompass the fundamental patterns of civilized existence: kingship, priesthood, truth, descent to the underworld, the shepherd's crook, and dozens of other cultural institutions and practices. According to Sumerian mythological texts, particularly the composition known as Inanna and Enki, these Mi existed as transferable possessions that could be obtained, lost, or stolen. The relationship between the Mi and the Tablet of Destinies illuminates different aspects of Mesopotamian cosmic ordering. The Mi establish the patterns of civilized existence within the created world, while the Tablet of Destinies determines the overall cosmic framework within which those patterns operate. Marduk's seizure of the tablet represents not merely military victory, but assumption of the authority to determine how the cosmos itself will be structured. The Babylonian New Year festival, during which the Enuma Elish was recited, included rituals in which the king's authority was richly renewed through symbolic connection to Marduk's cosmic kingship. The king approached the statue of Marduk, surrendered his royal insignia, and received them back after rituals that included the high priest striking his face and pulling his ears. This ritual humiliation, followed by restoration of authority, reenacted on the human scale the cosmic pattern by which authority is established through struggle, defeat of enemies, and divine approval. The Tablet of Destinies motif appears in other Mesopotamian myths as well, most notably the Anzu epic, which describes how the divine bird Anzu stole the tablet from Enlil's throne room and was subsequently defeated by the warrior god Ninurta. The structural parallels between the Anzu epic and the Marduk-Tiamat combat in the Enuma Elish led W. G. Lambert and other scholars to propose that the Babylonian creation epic adapted and transformed earlier Sumerian mythological traditions, replacing Enlil and Ninurta with Ea and Marduk as the primary divine protagonists. Tiamat's creation of 11 monsters to serve as her army represents a paradox central to the Enuma Elish's treatment of chaos and order. These creatures, Bashmu, Ushumgalu, Mushmahu, Mushushu Lamu, Ugalu, Uridimu, Girtablulu, Umu, Dabrutu, Klulu, and Kasarikuun, are hybrid beings combining features of different animals, often depicted in Mesopotamian iconography with serpentine, leonine, avian, and human characteristics. The creation of monsters requires creative capacity, the ability to organize matter into new forms, to combine elements according to pattern and purpose. Tiamat, the primordial sea representing undifferentiated chaos, produces beings of terrifying specificity, each with distinct form, name, and function. This creative act suggests that chaos, in the Mesopotamian understanding, is not simply disorder, but potential order, matter capable of being organized, requiring only the application of creative will to assume definite form. The monsters' bodies are filled with poison instead of blood, a detail that emphasizes their fundamentally different nature from the organized divine beings they will fight. Blood, in Mesopotamian thought, carried life force and creative potential. The mixture of Kingu's blood with clay to form humanity represents the infusion of divine vitality into earthly matter. Poison, by contrast, represents death and destruction, the opposite of the creative life force that blood embodies. The specific monsters named in the text connect to broader categories of Mesopotamian supernatural beings documented in other sources. The Mushushu, for example, appears as the symbolic animal of Marduk himself in later iconography. The famous dragon of the Ishtar Gate at Babylon represents this creature, its image preserved in the glazed brick reliefs now housed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The transformation of Tiamat's war beast into Marduk's cult symbol illustrates how the creative act transforms chaos into ordered existence without destroying the underlying material. The Girtablulu, or scorpion men, appear in the Epic of Gilgamesh as guardians of the mountain through which the sun passes during its nighttime journey. Their role as boundary guardians, liminal beings stationed at the threshold between the known world and the cosmic beyond, reflects the Mesopotamian association of hybrid creatures with boundary zones where different cosmic realms meet. Tiamat's army represents not merely military force, but the dangerous potentiality of boundary dissolution, the threat that distinctions between cosmic zones might collapse. The creation of humanity from the blood of the defeated god Kingu represents the culmination of the cosmic creative process in the Enuma Elish. Marduk proposes using his own blood for this purpose, but Ea advises that one of the defeated gods be sacrificed instead. The assembly of gods designates Kingu, who had worn the Tablet of Destinies and led Tiamat's forces, as the victim. His blood, mixed with clay, forms the substance from which humans are fashioned. The purpose of human creation in Mesopotamian thought was explicitly to serve the gods, to perform the labour that gods had previously performed themselves, particularly the construction and maintenance of temples and the preparation of offerings. This understanding appears most explicitly in the Atrahasis epic, which describes how the gods, tired of performing their own work, created humanity to bear the burden in their place. This purpose stands in complex relationship to the actual social reality of ancient Mesopotamia, where elaborate temple economies employed thousands of workers in activities ranging from agricultural production to artistic creation. The theological justification humans exist to serve gods provided ideological framework for economic and social organization, while simultaneously positioning human labor as participation in cosmic processes. The use of Kingu's blood, rather than Marduk's or another god's, carries additional significance. Kingu had rebelled against the divine order, had worn the Tablet of Destinies illegitimately, had led forces of chaos against organized existence. His sacrifice transforms rebellion into service, transmutes the blood of an enemy into the vital substance of loyal servants. Humanity thus carries within itself, in the Babylonian understanding, a trace of primordial rebellion transformed, through divine creative act, into the capacity for ordered service. The clay component of human composition connects to broader Mesopotamian understanding of earthly matter. Clay, the substance of the tablets on which all written knowledge was preserved, the material from which bricks for temples and ziggurats were formed, represented the earthly counterpart to the waters that dominated cosmogonic imagination. The combination of divine blood with earthly clay represents the intersection of celestial and terrestrial realms that characterizes human existence. The preservation of the Enuma Elish across multiple centuries and multiple copies reveals the sophisticated scribal tradition that maintained Mesopotamian intellectual heritage. Tablets recovered from different sites and time periods show remarkable consistency in the basic text, while exhibiting variations that illuminate the transmission process. The colophons attached to some tablets, notes at the end identifying the scribe, the date of copying, and sometimes the source from which the copy was made, provide evidence for understanding how texts were transmitted within the scribal tradition. A tablet might identify itself as copied from an older tablet in a specific temple library, creating chains of textual transmission that scholars can sometimes trace across centuries. The training of scribes involved copying standard texts, and literary compositions including the Enuma Elish appear among the exercises preserved in scribal school materials. Students learned cuneiform signs, vocabulary, and literary forms by reproducing canonical texts under the supervision of master scribes. This educational practice ensured the preservation of traditional compositions, while also introducing variations as students made errors or scribes introduced modifications. The Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, from which many of the most complete Enuma Elish tablets were recovered, represented a deliberate royal effort to collect and preserve Mesopotamian intellectual heritage. According to royal inscriptions, Ashurbanipal ordered the systematic copying of texts from throughout his realm, creating what may have been the largest collection of cuneiform documents ever assembled. The destruction of Nineveh in 612 BCE, when the city fell to a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians, paradoxically preserved this collection by burying it under rubble that protected the tablets until modern archaeological recovery. The fire that accompanied the city's destruction may have actually aided preservation in some cases. Clay tablets baked by conflagration became harder and more durable than unbaked tablets, which remained fragile and prone to deterioration. The baking of the Ashurbanipal library and the fires of Nineveh's destruction thus transformed fragile administrative and literary records into the more permanent form in which archaeologists recovered them. The tripartite structure of Mesopotamian, pre-creation, primordial stillness, primordial mixture, primordial awakening, invites comparison with structures appearing in other cosmogonic traditions. While direct genetic relationships cannot always be established, structural parallels illuminate recurring patterns in human cosmogonic thinking. Chinese cosmogonic tradition, preserved in texts including the Huainanzi, compiled circa 139 BCE, describes an initial state of Hundun, typically translated as chaos, but carrying connotations similar to the Mesopotamian concept of undifferentiated mixture. From Hundun emerged the separation of yin and yang, the complementary principles whose interaction generates all subsequent existence. The parallel with the Apsu-Tiamat pairing, freshwater and saltwater male and female principles, suggests structural homology even in the absence of direct cultural contact. The Pangu myth, recorded in various forms beginning around the 3rd century CE, describes a cosmic egg containing the primordial giant Pangu, who grows within the egg for 18,000 years before emerging to separate heaven and earth. The cosmic egg motif, while differing from Mesopotamian water-centered imagery, shares the structural feature of an enclosed primordial state requiring rupture or separation for the organized cosmos to emerge. Japanese cosmogony, as preserved in the Kojiki, 712 CE, and Nihon Shoki, 720 CE, describes an initial state when heaven and earth were not yet separated, when all was contained in an egg-shaped chaos. From this chaos, light and pure elements rose to form heaven, while heavy and turbid elements sank to form earth. The contrast between rising and sinking elements parallels the Mesopotamian separation of cosmic realms, while the egg imagery connects to traditions appearing across Eurasia. The Norse tradition of Ginnungagap, the primordial void between the realms of fire, Muspelheim, and ice, to Niflheim, presents yet another variant. Here the primordial state is characterized not by water, but by the interaction of opposing elemental forces whose meeting in the gap between worlds generates the first life. The giant Ymir, formed from the dripping waters created by fire-melting ice, provides the material from which the world is subsequently constructed, his body becoming the earth, his blood the sea, his skull the sky. These varied traditions share structural features while differing in specific content. The primordial state is characterized by undifferentiation, containment, or opposition of fundamental principles. Creation involves separation, emergence, or the resolution of opposition through conflict or transformation. The material of the organized cosmos derives from primordial substance, whether water, giant's body, or cosmic egg, transformed through the creative act. The ritual context of the Enuma Elish's recitation illuminates how ancient Babylonians understood the ongoing significance of cosmogonic events. The Akitu festival, celebrated for 12 days at the spring equinox, involved elaborate ceremonies that scholars have reconstructed from ritual texts, administrative records, and descriptions in later sources. On the fourth day of the festival, the Uragalu priest recited the entire Enuma Elish before the statue of Marduk in the Asagala temple at Babylon. This recitation occurred with the temple doors closed, in a setting of ritual seclusion that emphasized the sacred character of the composition. The text was not performed for entertainment or general edification, but as a ritual act believed to have cosmic efficacy. The subsequent days of the festival involved rituals including the symbolic humiliation and restoration of the king, processions of divine statues through the city, the determination of destinies for the coming year, and what some scholars interpret as a ritual dramatization of the Marduk-Tiamat combat. The king's ritual humiliation, during which the high priest struck his face and pulled his ears while the king declared that he had not sinned against Marduk, represented the temporary dissolution of royal authority that preceded its cosmic renewal. The determination of destinies that occurred during the festival connected to the Tablet of Destinies motif in the Enuma Elish. Just as Marduk seized the tablet and thereby gained authority to determine cosmic fate, the annual festival ritually renewed this determination for the coming year. The gods assembled, represented by their statues brought from temples throughout the city, to fix the fates of king, city, and empire. This ritual framework suggests that the Babylonians understood creation not as a completed past event, but as an ongoing process requiring annual renewal. The forces of chaos that Marduk defeated did not cease to exist but continued to press against the boundaries of ordered existence. The spring festival, occurring at the time of the year when winter's grip loosened and new growth began, ritually ensured that order would triumph over chaos for another cycle. The interpretation of Mesopotamian creation texts has evolved significantly since George Smith's initial publications in the 1870s. Early scholars, working within frameworks shaped by biblical studies and classical education, tended to interpret Mesopotamian material as primitive precursors to biblical and Greek thought. This evolutionary framework positioned Mesopotamian cosmogony as an early stage in human intellectual development that achieved fuller expression in later traditions. Subsequent scholarship, particularly from the mid-20th century onward, has increasingly emphasized the sophistication and distinctiveness of Mesopotamian thought on its own terms. Researchers, including Jacobson, Kramer, and Lambert, demonstrated that Mesopotamian cosmogonic speculation represented not primitive groping toward later insights, but a fully developed intellectual tradition with its own assumptions, methods, and conclusions. Contemporary scholars approach Mesopotamian creation texts through multiple interpretive frameworks. Philological analysis focuses on precise translation and the identification of textual variants. Comparative mythology examines parallels with other traditions to identify common patterns and distinctive features. Religious studies approach treats the texts as evidence for ancient belief and practice. Literary analysis examines narrative structure, poetic devices, and rhetorical strategies. The question of the text's contemporary relevance remains open. For some scholars, these ancient documents represent primarily historical interest, evidence for how people thought in times and places radically different from our own. For others, the cosmogonic questions the texts address: what existed before existence, how order emerges from chaos, what purpose existence serves, remain live questions that ancient sources illuminate even if they cannot answer definitively. The resonance between Mesopotamian cosmogonic concepts and contemporary scientific cosmology deserves neither overstatement nor dismissal. Ancient scribes possessed neither the observational instruments nor the mathematical frameworks that enable modern cosmological science. Yet both ancient speculation and modern theory grapple with similar conceptual challenges, describing conditions before the existence of the categories normally used to describe conditions, explaining how differentiation emerges from undifferentiation, understanding the relationship between potentiality and actuality. The clay tablets that preserve Mesopotamian creation thought represent humanity's earliest extended written meditation on cosmic origins. They were composed by scribes who looked at the same stars we observe, who lived beside rivers that still flow, who asked questions we continue to ask. The specific answers they proposed, the primordial waters, the generational emergence of divine beings, the cosmic battle that produced the world, reflect their particular cultural context. The questions they asked transcend that context, connecting ancient scribes to contemporary inquirers in an ongoing human dialogue about the nature and origin of existence. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat represents the climactic moment of the Enuma Elish, the point at which pre-creation definitively transforms into creation. The tablets describe this combat in vivid detail that combines mythological narrative with what scholars have interpreted as ritual formula and theological assertion. Marduk prepares for battle by gathering weapons of unprecedented power. He makes a bow and fletches arrows. He grasps a mace. He throws lightning before him and fills his body with flame. Most significantly, he creates a net, a gift from his grandfather Anu, to encircle Tiamat so that no part of her can escape. He gathers the 4 winds and creates 7 additional terrible winds: the whirlwind, the tornado, and 5 others whose names have been variously translated. These preparations establish Marduk as a figure of overwhelming cosmic force. The combination of weapons from different categories, projectile bow and arrows, melee, mace, elemental, lightning and flame, containment, net, and atmospheric winds, suggests complete command over all modes of combat and all cosmic elements. Marduk does not defeat Tiamat through superior force in a single dimension, but through total mastery across all dimensions of cosmic power. The combat itself proceeds according to a specific sequence that scholars have analysed for its ritual and symbolic dimensions. Marduk spreads his net and enmeshes Tiamat. She opens her mouth to swallow him, a detail that has been interpreted as reflecting the devouring nature of primordial chaos, the tendency of undifferentiated matter to absorb and dissolve distinct forms. Marduk responds by releasing the evil wind, which fills her mouth and prevents her from closing it. The winds weigh down her belly, distending her body, forcing her mouth open. With Tiamat thus incapacitated, Marduk shoots an arrow that pierces her belly, tears open her entrails, and splits her heart. The verb translated as split, parasu, carries connotations of division and separation that echo the cosmic act of differentiation that creation represents. Tiamat's death is simultaneously her transformation, the conversion of undifferentiated primordial sea into the structured components of the organized cosmos. The text describes Marduk standing upon Tiamat's corpse, examining her dead body to determine how it might be used. He splits her like a shellfish, or like a mussel, into 2 halves. From one half he forms the sky, stretching it out as a roof. From the other half he forms the earth. Her eyes become the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her tail becomes the Milky Way. Her weeping contributes to the waters that fill the rivers and enable human civilization. This creative use of Tiamat's body represents a fundamental principle of Mesopotamian cosmogonic thought: creation through transformation rather than creation from nothing. The material substance of the cosmos derives from primordial matter that existed before organization. The creative act involves division, arrangement, assignment of function, the imposition of order upon substance that already exists. The sky is not called into being from void. It is Tiamat's upper body stretched out and fixed in place. The earth is not spoken into existence. It is Tiamat's lower body established as the foundation upon which organized existence rests. The 11 monsters that Tiamat had created are captured, bound, and trampled under Marduk's feet. Rather than destroying them, Marduk transforms them into trophies and eventually into protective figures stationed at cosmic boundaries. Statues of these creatures, according to the text, were made and installed at the Gate of Apsu, the dwelling place that Ea had established upon the defeated body of the primordial freshwater ocean. The monsters of chaos thus become guardians against chaos, their terrible forms repurposed to protect the order that their creation had threatened to destroy. Kingu, Tiamat's champion who had worn the Tablet of Destinies, is captured and imprisoned. His fate, to be sacrificed for the creation of humanity, awaits determination by the divine assembly. The Tablet of Destinies is taken from his breast and given to Anu, establishing the proper cosmic hierarchy in which supreme authority flows through the generations of gods according to proper order rather than through rebellion and illegitimate assumption of power. Following his victory over Tiamat, Marduk engages in the systematic organization of the cosmos. The text describes this process in detail that combines practical cosmography with theological assertion. Marduk establishes dwelling places for the great gods in the heavens. He creates the stars and assigns them positions. He organizes the calendar, fixing the lengths of days and months and years. The moon receives particular attention in this organizational process. Marduk causes the moon to shine, entrusting to it the night. He establishes its phases, waxing and waning, opposition to and conjunction with the sun, that will structure human timekeeping for millennia. The precision with which lunar phenomena can be predicted reflects, in Mesopotamian understanding, the precision with which Marduk established the moon's courses at the moment of cosmic organization. The relationship between this cosmographic organization and the astronomical observations preserved in texts like Mul Dapin illuminates the integration of religious and scientific thought in Mesopotamian civilization. The same scribes who copied hymns to Marduk also recorded observations of lunar eclipses. The same intellectual tradition that produced the Enuma Elish produced mathematical methods for predicting planetary positions. Cosmogonic narrative and astronomical calculation represented not opposing modes of thought but complementary approaches to understanding the cosmic order. Marduk divides the gods into two groups, 300 assigned to the heavens and 600 assigned to the earth and underworld. This numerical structure, producing a total of 900 gods, or equivalently 360 plus 180 plus 360, reflects the sexagesimal mathematical framework while establishing cosmic population as a structured rather than arbitrary quantity. The assignment of gods to specific cosmic regions establishes the administrative structure of the universe, with divine beings responsible for particular domains, functions, and locations. The construction of Babylon and the Asagila Temple represents the culmination of the organizational process on Earth. The gods themselves participate in this construction, making bricks for an entire year before the great temple rises to completion. This divine labor establishes a precedent that human temple construction will subsequently follow. The work of building sacred spaces echoes the primordial work by which the gods established the center of cosmic worship. The 50 names of Marduk recited in the seventh and final tablet of the composition represent the fullest theological elaboration of his cosmic significance. Each name carries specific meaning and power, associating Marduk with particular divine functions and attributes. Some names derive from older deities whose powers and spheres of influence are now absorbed into Marduk's comprehensive divine identity. The recitation of these names at the Akitu festival constituted a liturgical affirmation of Marduk's supremacy and, by extension, Babylon's status as the cosmic center. The role of underground waters in Mesopotamian cosmology deserves particular attention for understanding the pre-creation narrative. The Abzu, Akkadian Apsu, rendered in some translations as abyss, represented the subterranean freshwater ocean believed to underlie the visible earth. Springs, wells, and the seasonal rising of the Tigris and Euphrates were understood as manifestations of this underground water body. The Temple of Enki at Eridu, as noted earlier, was built directly over what was believed to be access to the Abzu. Archaeological evidence suggests that this site included actual pools or basins that symbolically represented the underground waters. These ritual installations allowed worshippers and priests to interact with the cosmic dimension that the Abzu represented, to perform rituals that engaged the creative powers associated with subterranean freshwater. The relationship between Apsu as primordial entity and Abzu as cosmic feature illuminates the Mesopotamian understanding of how creation transformed primordial conditions into permanent cosmic structures. Apsu, the personified freshwater ocean, was killed by Ea, but the Abzu, the underground water body, continues to exist as a feature of the organized cosmos. The creative act transforms animate primordial beings into inanimate cosmic structures while preserving the essential qualities, freshwater's association with wisdom, creativity, and the foundation of civilization, in their new form. The vertical structure of Mesopotamian cosmology positioned the heavens above, the earth in the middle, and the underworld below. This tripartite division corresponds roughly to the three generations of primordial beings: Anu, heaven, descended from Anshar and Kisha, horizon, who descended from Lamu and Lahamu, silt, boundary, who emerged from the mixture of Apsu, depths, and Tiamat, expanse. The genealogical sequence thus maps onto cosmic geography, with earlier generations corresponding to lower cosmic regions and later generations to higher ones. The underworld, known as Kur in Sumerian and Irkalla in Akkadian, represented the realm of the dead, but also the cosmic depths from which certain powers and challenges emerged. The Sumerian composition known as Gilgamesh and the Netherworld describes how the cosmic regions were distributed among the great gods after the initial separation of heaven and earth. This distribution established ongoing divine responsibility for each cosmic zone, responsibilities that the Akitu festival and other rituals helped to maintain. The survival of Mesopotamian cosmogonic thought across more than 4 millennia, from the earliest temple records at Eridu through the final cuneiform documents of the 1st century CE, represents one of history's longest continuous intellectual traditions. Understanding how this survival was achieved illuminates both the sophistication of Mesopotamian scribal culture and the factors that eventually led to the tradition's extinction. The scribal schools, a duba in Sumerian tablet house, that trained successive generations of cuneiform writers provided the institutional framework for textual transmission. Students learned the writing system by copying standard texts, beginning with simple sign lists and progressing to complex literary compositions. The Enuma Elish and related cosmogonic texts appear among the advanced exercises, indicating that these compositions represented sophisticated material requiring substantial prior training to copy accurately. The curriculum preserved in various sources included not only literary texts but lexical lists, cataloguing cuneiform signs and their values, mathematical texts teaching the sexagesimal system and its applications, and administrative documents modelling the record-keeping that formed the primary practical application of scribal skills. This comprehensive curriculum ensured that graduates possessed the skills necessary both for practical administration and for the preservation and transmission of cultural heritage. Royal patronage played a crucial role in certain periods of intensive textual preservation. Ashurbanipal's systematic collection of texts from throughout his realm has already been noted. Earlier efforts, though less well documented, appear to have been undertaken during the reign of Hammurabi of Babylon, 1792-1750 BCE, and during the Third Dynasty of Ur, in 2112 to 2004 BCE. These periods of royal interest in textual heritage produced the copies that would be copied by subsequent generations. The transition from cuneiform to alphabetic writing systems, occurring gradually during the first millennium BCE, eventually terminated the cuneiform tradition. Aramaic, written in an alphabetic script far easier to learn than the hundreds of cuneiform signs, increasingly dominated commerce and administration. The last dated cuneiform tablet, an astronomical text from 75 CE, marks the end of over 3,000 years of continuous scribal tradition. The cosmogonic knowledge preserved in cuneiform entered a long sleep from which it would not awaken until 19th century archaeologists recovered the buried tablets. The Mesopotamian attempt to describe conditions before creation raises philosophical questions that subsequent traditions have continued to explore. How can conditions be described when the categories normally used for description had not yet come into being? How can time before time be measured? How can space before space be mapped? The Enuma Elish addresses these questions implicitly rather than explicitly. The text describes primordial conditions using language and categories that, strictly speaking, should not apply. Apsu and Tiamat mingle their waters, but mingling presupposes the distinction between waters that mingling transcends. The primordial entities exist together, but togetherness presupposes spatial relationship in a state before space has been organized. Time passes between generations, but temporal sequence presupposes the calendar structures that Marduk establishes only after cosmic creation. These conceptual tensions may reflect the inherent difficulty of discussing pre-creation conditions, rather than carelessness or confusion on the part of ancient authors. Modern scientific cosmology faces similar challenges when describing conditions before the Big Bang or outside the observable universe. The categories developed for describing the organized cosmos cannot be straightforwardly extended to conditions where those categories do not apply. The Mesopotamian response to this difficulty involved using familiar language metaphorically or analogically, while recognizing that such language could only approximate conditions that exceeded human conceptual capacity. The waters that mingle are not ordinary waters, they are cosmic principles bearing the names of water categories. The time that passes is not ordinary time, it is the proto-temporal sequence that precedes calendar organization. This metaphorical approach to cosmogonic description appears in other ancient traditions as well. The Hindu Nastya Sukta explicitly acknowledges the difficulty. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? The Greek Hesiod begins his theogony with an invocation of the Muses, who alone possess knowledge of such distant events. The recognition that cosmogonic knowledge exceeds ordinary human capacity appears as a recurring feature of ancient reflection on cosmic origins. The archaeological evidence from Mesopotamian sites examined in this investigation establishes several key points about ancient understanding of pre-creation conditions. Excavations at Nippur, Ur, and Uruk reveal coordinated transmission of cosmogonic texts across multiple centuries, marked by consistent textual content preserved in tablets from different periods and locations. The textual evidence, preserved in tablets from these sites and others, describes pre-creation using remarkably consistent terminology and narrative frameworks despite composition across multiple decades and locations. Scientific analysis of tablet materials and dating confirms the chronological clustering of copy production during specific periods of intensive scribal activity. Comparative evidence from contemporary Egyptian, Greek, and Hindu contexts reveals parallel concerns during similar periods. Attempts to describe primordial conditions, struggles with the logical difficulties such description involves, and development of narrative frameworks for organizing cosmogonic speculation. Whether these represent related phenomena, reflecting widespread intellectual developments in the first millennia BCE, or independent responses to common human questions, cannot be definitively determined from available evidence. The astronomical references in certain tablets demonstrate observational precision consistent with documented Mesopotamian astronomical practice. Though the purpose and significance of these particular observations within the broader cosmogonic narrative remain subject to interpretation, the mathematical methods documented in related cuneiform texts provide context for understanding the numerical symbolism that pervades Mesopotamian cosmogonic thought. Significant questions remain unresolved despite decades of scholarly attention. The archaeological evidence for the pre-Babylonian period suffers from incomplete excavation coverage. Many relevant sites remain unexcavated or only partially explored, limiting understanding of the geographic extent and uniformity of cosmogonic traditions across southern Mesopotamia. Approximately 60% of known cuneiform literary compositions remain unpublished or inadequately translated, residing in museum collections awaiting scholarly attention. The few scientific studies of materials from the key periods have focused primarily on typological classification rather than detailed compositional analysis that might reveal additional information about production contexts and transmission patterns. Application of advanced dating techniques and analytical methods to artifacts from relevant periods could contribute to more precise understanding of when and where cosmogonic texts were produced and copied. Future research directions include systematic re-examination of excavation records from early 20th century expeditions using modern stratigraphic methods, completion of textual publication and translation projects for the relevant tablet series, and comparative analysis across the broader ancient Near Eastern region to identify patterns and regional variations. Recent developments in digital humanities methodologies offer potential for fresh approaches to this material that were not available to previous generations of scholars. The evidence examined throughout this investigation, archaeological, textual, comparative, and interpretive, establishes that ancient Mesopotamian civilization developed sophisticated frameworks for understanding pre-creation conditions. These frameworks, preserved on clay tablets that have survived the collapse of the civilizations that produced them, continue to reward scholarly attention and stimulate reflection on questions that remain unresolved. The 72 hours before creation began, whether understood literally or metaphorically, represent a conceptual space that ancient scribes mapped with remarkable care and that contemporary inquiry continues to explore. The tablets from Nippur and Nineveh, from Ur and Uruk and Babylon, preserve accounts that resist simple categorization. Too detailed for pure mythology, too cosmic for pure history, they occupy an ambiguous space between genres that challenges modern interpretive frameworks. Perhaps the difficulty lies not in the ancient texts, but in modern expectations about how the ancient peoples understood and described their world. The boundaries between religious expression, historical memory, and institutional record, however, may have been more fluid in ancient Mesopotamia than modern scholarship generally assumes. The clay tablets remain, preserved in museum collections across the world, in the British Museum's Mesopotamian galleries, in the University of Pennsylvania Museum's Babylonian section, in the Louvre-City's Department of Near Eastern Antiquities, in Berlin's Vorderasiatisches Museum. They bear witness across millennia to humanity's earliest systematic attempts to articulate what existed before the beginning, what conditions obtained before the cosmos took form. These documents, impressed with wedge-shaped marks by scribes who lived 3,000 years ago, preserve questions we have not yet finished asking and invite continued investigation into the mysteries they both reveal and perpetuate.